Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we are going to be playing the King's Indian Defense versus everything as both the white and the black pieces, and I'll be explaining my thought process as best as I can for your education and entertainment. I used to play the King's Indian Defense exclusively with the black pieces probably like 4 or 5 years ago. So it has been a while since I've played the King's Indian, but one of the reasons I've chosen this opening for this series is because, one, I think that obviously you can play it with the white or the black pieces, which is a massive bonus, but two, you don't need to know like tons of theory. You can go into incredibly theoretical lines, but you don't need to, right? Like, you can play it in a more flexible manner. There's lots of different plans you can go for. Like, obviously, we want to go g6 and bishop g7. That's the main idea, with this pawn on d6 to stop e5 kicking the knight away. You might be thinking, oh, can't white go e5 in this position? Not really, because after take, and knight g4, white is going to be losing a pawn because e5 is under attack and f2 is under attack with the threat of a fork. So that's not an issue. So knight c3 instead, and we'll continue with pawn g6. And, you know, we can be flexible by, for example, after fianchettoing and castling, we might go, oh, you know what, let's fianchetto the light squared bishop as well. Maybe we'll break with c5, maybe we'll break with e5, maybe we'll go c6 and go for more of a pit sort of attack with b5 if white goes queenside. There's lots of different ways we can go about this. My opponent goes for the Austrian attack with f4, e4, d4, which is a very scary looking line. Very scary. But most of the time, e5 isn't all that effective because, again, if my opponent goes e5, we'll just take. And if he takes with the f pawn, we can always go knight d5. If he takes with the d pawn, we can always go for a queen trade, and we should be better in those positions. So it's not really too concerning. Okay, knight f3. I think we can go ahead and castle. One of the things that f4 does, which is beneficial for us, is it does block this bishop's scope to h6, so we don't really have to worry about any bishop e3, queen d2, bishop h6 ideas, which is a very common way for white to try to trade off black's strong fianchetto dark squared bishop, so be aware of that idea. And yeah, we have the setup. We have the fianchetto, we're castled kingside, the knight is on f6, the pawn is on d6. The pawn is very important on d6 because, again, e5 is annoying going after the knight. We have gifted white the entire center, right? This is like kind of a hyper-modern opening. You do give white the full center, but then we look to counterattack. But we need to make sure we don't give white too much of the center. For example, if this pawn was back on d7, right, and white were to go e5 and kick our knight back to e8, that would be a very difficult position to play because our dark squared bishop would be completely locked out of the game, and we would have to try to break the position with moves like d6 and c5 to eat away at white's dark squares in the center. So d6 is preemptively stopping pawn to e5, right, and preparing dark squared pawn breaks. Okay, pawn h3, that's interesting. That is interesting. We should note that the g3 square is now very weak. And I mean, in theory, knight h5, knight g3 is already an idea. In reality, I think king f2 is even a perfectly valid way of stopping knight to g3. Because, I mean, the white king isn't in any particular danger. And it's kind of wasting a move for us, to be honest. So maybe he's trying to stop bishop to g4, pinning the knight. I don't think I'd really want to play that anyway, because the light square bishop can be very important in King's Indian positions. So, okay, knight c6 is probably the move that a lot of you are thinking of, but after d5, where does the knight go? You know, we're probably just going to have to drop it back, and we could argue that we can then break open the white center, because there's no pawn c4, because his knight is in the way, and we open up this diagonal. We could argue that. Alternatively, we could just put the knight on d7 and prepare pawn to e5. Maybe we could go for that sort of idea. The white king isn't castled yet as well, which makes me very tempted to go for this. We could go pawn c5 and go for like a Benoni structure with d5 and e6. That's an option. But okay, let's say knight to d7. Maybe bishop e2? Pawn e5? Take, take, take. Nah, it doesn't really work. I think we have to start with rook e8 to actually execute that. Maybe we should go rook e8 now? If white goes e5, again, I don't think it's very good after we take. If here, then here. c5 might be the break, I don't know. In the King's Indian, normally you're looking at either c5 or e5 to break open the white center. Those tend to be your pawn breaks. What's good about this position is that on e5, white can't really get away with pushing d5, because after something like take and rook e8, e4 is going to be super weak. Super, super weak, because we open up the e-file by force. So, okay, I'm going to go knight bd7. I prefer that move, I think, because knight c6 just feels slightly wrong. It can be the move in some positions, because pushing d5 is sometimes weakening for white. But I also like the idea of this supporting the c5 push, because if c5 and take, I think I'd rather take with the knight than taking with the pawn, so I can apply good pressure to the e4 square, and also maintain control over the e5 square with the pawn on d6 rather than c5. So I think I prefer knight bd7. And other than that, rook e8 and e5 looks interesting. c6, queen c7 looks interesting, which is more of a Pirtz sort of idea. Pirtz, however you want to pronounce it. But again, we can be flexible. We don't have to play the best moves in every single position. We just have to play decent moves. Okay, pawn e5. I suppose, yeah, that is a good point, actually. Because now if take, I don't have knight d... Sorry. Now if taken take, I don't have knight d5. And if taken take, I don't have the queen trade. So maybe knight c6 is better because of that. But we shall not despair, because we don't have to take. The move I'm looking at is actually knight to h5. Trying to clear a bit of space, encourage white to take us, and threaten this infiltration. Now, one thing we have to be aware of is if knight h5 and king f2 stopping knight g3, g4 would trap the knight. The knight would have no moves. So if knight h5, king f2, how do we continue? Because I don't really want to have to move my bishop and put the knight on g7. That looks a bit silly. But how else do I stop my knight from getting trapped? If I play take... Trying to look for tactics against the white queen, but it is defended by this knight. So maybe I have to go knight to e8, which is a move I really don't want to play. I think I'm going to have to go for it, though. It's not the end of the world, but it is making me think that knight c6 was better. The point is, if I'd have gone knight c6 and then e5, then I can take. Because if he takes with the f-pawn, I play knight d5, supported by the queen. And if knight c6, e5, take, and he takes with the d-pawn, then I can go for the queen trade. And after king takes... I suppose I can go knight h5, because you can't stop me from going into g3. Or I can go knight back to d7. That would also be viable. But okay, this is the position we have. And we're definitely very cramped, for sure. But with white committing the pawn to e5, we have very easy ways of applying pressure to the center, right? White is also a couple moves away from castling. His king isn't that safe. I mean, it's unclear how we're actually going to attack his king, and I also don't think that's really the goal of the black position. But c5 looks very strong. Looks very, very strong. And then knight on e8 is actually kind of useful, to be fair, because after something like c5, dc5, knight c5. If he takes on d6 and after queen d6, queen d6, I can take back with the knight rather than the pawn. Because if pawn takes, the pawn would actually be quite weak. But after knight takes, I mean, we just look better, much better in that position. Of course, white does not have to comply. He can do something else. But I think we are okay here. I think we're okay. Cramped, yes. But that's sometimes just something that you've got to deal with in the King's Indian. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I would really appreciate it. Okay, bishop e3. That looks like a very natural move. Trying to maybe prevent pawn c5 ideas. Yeah, okay, so we can't get away with pawn c5. Can't get away with it. Because if c5 take, knight takes, bishop takes, pawn takes, my queen hangs on d8. Because my rook is disconnected. That's unfortunate. If I take on e5, I don't think that's really getting us anywhere. Just take... Well, I suppose probably d takes, actually. But again, my queen is undefended. Maybe c6, trying to get my queen over here. c5 take, queen a5. Can I go for that? Maybe c5 take and take? That's interesting. c5, dc5, de5, fe5. I can't take with the knight, because again, my queen hangs. Queen a5. Is e6 a problem? I don't know. Is e6 viable? Trying to give my queen access to this diagonal? I don't think so. I mean, there's even an argument to be made for b6, c5. I don't know if I'm convinced by it, though. Let's think. Let's think. If we go take and take, we have to be concerned about pawn e6 if we trade our d-pawn, because this will be a very, very weak structure. What about knight b6? I haven't considered that. What about knight b6? Does it do anything? Well, maybe we can take here. Because if d takes, we can trade queens and go for like bishop e6. We also stop bishop c4. So knight b6 is interesting. Again, I really want to make c5 work. Knight takes. I just don't think it does. Our queen is undefended. That's the issue. I think I like knight b6. And I'm also getting low on time, so I should probably play it. I'm not really concerned about white trying to attack me on the king side. I mean, he can go for this, but if he goes h4, there's a very easy way for us to stop the attack. Well, there's two ways, really. One, we can go h5, and g4 is clamped down on. And two, if h4, we can go bishop g4, followed by h5, which clamps down on pawn g4. If pawn g4, trying to break through, well, the pawn break is on h5. That's the pawn break that white has to go for. He could go for f5, but then that weakens the center, I'd say, pretty significantly. So I'm not really concerned about that. Not really concerned. So, okay. If white plays... What's a natural move here? Bishop e2, let's say. Just developing the bishop, maybe applying more pressure to this diagonal to get the pawns rolling somehow. Bishop e2, if we take... If he takes with a d-pawn, we'd probably trade queens and play bishop e6 sort of things. Okay, that looks wrong because of bishop f5. Where does the queen go? Here I take. Now my queen is defended by the rook as well. Yeah, this doesn't look right at all. I assume he wants to castle kingside. Sorry, queenside. But queen d2 looks far more natural if that's the plan. Okay, queen back to e2. That blocks this bishop's development. I know g4 can come with tempo on my bishop, and I assume that might be part of the idea. We can take here on e5. c5 doesn't really make sense. I think we should take and then go for knight d5 ideas if f takes. Yeah, if he goes for d takes, well, then he can't castle queenside anymore. Yeah, so he does go f takes, which does open up the f file. Semi-scary, but I don't think it's that big a deal. Also opens this up, but I don't think it's that problematic. We could go c6 and be ultra solid. If g4, bishop e6. We could even look for bishop c4, supported by the knight. c5 still feels like a natural pawn break, but practically it doesn't work here. I also like the idea of knight c7, knight d5, bringing this knight back into the game. So let's go c6. Let's go c6. I assume white will castle queenside, and he'll probably try to attack me on the king side. But I think we're okay. I think we're okay. We have very nice control over the center. And while our dark square bishop is a bit locked out, our light square bishop is quite powerful, actually. And our knights have a clear home on the d5 square, right? This is slightly different from a typical King's Indian, where this pawn would be on c4, right? Normally, it would be more like this, which would be slightly more difficult because we wouldn't be able to put a knight on d5. But with the knight on c3 like this, and this being more of a Peert's defense than a King's Indian, although they're obviously very similar, it gives us slightly more space to work with in the center. And by white playing the c5 move, obviously it did make sense at the time. It does obviously grant us the d5 square, and we are now looking to work with the light squares in the center to try to deal with black. Sorry, to try to deal with the white position. Okay, knight g5. Obviously that attacks the bishop, and this would be pretty catastrophic. Now, we could go knight c7, and basically encouraging white to take our bishop so that we can take back with the knight and have some pressure. Can't say I'm convinced, to be honest. I don't know, it doesn't feel quite right to trade off this bishop like that. Now, we could go bishop to c4, hitting the white queen, defended by the knight. And if something like queen f3, maybe we take, although to be honest, I think I prefer a move like knight c7, encouraging white to take us and let our knight into c4. That looks quite nice to me. Let's do it. Let's do it. This knight isn't all that concerning, really. I mean, I know h4, h5 is scary. And in the King's Indian, sometimes you just have to deal with these very aggressive pawn storms from the other side into your king's position. But as long as there's no way for white to completely roll over our position immediately, do we have to panic? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Our king is still relatively safe. Still relatively safe. And the white king for now is still in the center of the board. So, you know, there's that. Obviously, this makes no sense for white to try and trade the queen for my knight and bishop. That would be ludicrous. We just go pawn e6, take full control over d5, and trade. Okay, queen d2. That's interesting. Supporting something like this, but the knight is in the way for the time being. It's interesting, though. However, doesn't that just... Yeah. Bishop f1, knight c4. And this is a concept that you should try to make yourself familiar with if you want to play Peert's or King's Indian positions, where when the queen is on d2 and the bishop is on e3, which is a very, very common formation to try and go bishop h6 and trade off the crown jewel of our position, our fianchettoed King's Indian bishop, right? If you can get knight c4 in, which, you know, it looks like a move that doesn't actually happen that much, but it does. Knight c4 is such a common idea, whether it's by a knight coming to a5 and into c4, or via b6 into c4. It's so common, and I think the white position is falling apart now. I genuinely think it's falling apart, which might sound like I'm overreacting, but I'm really not. I'm really, really not overreacting. I don't think I am anyway, because once white loses this bishop, his attacking chances are all but gone. They're all but gone. Like, the knights can only do so much, because my dark square bishop is just an incredible defender. Queen c1 ensuring this is defended. I don't want to allow white any chance to save the bishop. I'm going to take it immediately. Pawn e6 looks very tempting, because I can't really allow white to go pawn e6. We could go knight c7, but I kind of think he's going to go e6 anyway. So we should probably stop that. And I know I'm relinquishing some control over f6, right? You know, maybe the knight can come into f6. But I think that's a sacrifice I'm willing to make in this position. Okay, my opponent castles. Bishop h6 looks tempting because of all the pieces lined up here. Although h4 should defend very nicely, so I'm not sure it actually does anything useful. I think it's just an idea we should keep in our back pocket. Queen a5 looks viable, but I think I like the pressure on this knight for now. So maybe I want to put the knight on d5. Now, if knight here, knight here, knight here, he could put the knight on d6. Could put the knight on d6. Is that a concern? I don't know. Don't know. The game isn't over, of course. While it's a massive win to get the bishop, the game is not over. Don't mistake that. We could try throwing the pawns forward. I mean, there's no d5. That's clamped down on very nicely. If h4, h5, then we can go bishop h6. And if knight here, suppose he can defend. That is true. That is true. Okay. c5 obviously makes no sense. We just give up a pawn with tempo. I think b5, b4. I know that knight c7 looks very natural, trying to come into d5, but I am pretty concerned about a knight getting to d6 because of how much pressure is on f7 in that position. The game is not over. There could still be fireworks here. Maybe I've underestimated white's knights a bit. He can put the knight on c5 to try to blockade my position, but I'm not overly concerned about the knight coming to c5 because it doesn't actually stop my A and B pawns from rolling. And while it keeps my c pawn as a backwards pawn, because it just can't be pushed, I mean, how is white actually going to win that pawn? Like, let's say, I don't know, for the sake of argument, queen f3 hitting the pawn. Like, okay, maybe that also attacks f7, sure, but that does hang the knight for the time being. But let's say it doesn't hang the knight. Let's say it doesn't. I can just go queen c7, defending, and I'm fine. Although maybe queen c7 takes away the opportunity to play knight d7. Knight c7, sorry. So maybe queen d7 makes more sense, and we just prepare to bring the knight to d5, and then we cut the queen's access to c6 anyway, right? So I don't think that's a massive deal. Don't think that's a massive deal. Our bishop, as we've mentioned, is locked out of the game for the time being because of this pawn wedge in the center. White could even maybe move the knight and go c3 to make it connect 4. But we do have access to h6 to get on this diagonal. And also, if, you know, we go for moves like c5 in the future, which right now it's not a viable move, but in the future it could be, and then maybe we can rip open the center and get our bishop really involved in the game. But for the current context, it's more of a defensive piece, and that's fine. It can be a defensive piece. That's not a problem. It doesn't have to be, you know, bearing down on b2 with all kinds of attacking prospects. While that would be brilliant, it doesn't have to be that. So I think if white were to do nothing, we'd probably want to roll the a pawn down the board. That's probably what I would go for. That would make a lot of sense to me. Bringing the knight to c7 and d5 would make a lot of sense. b4, I don't know about, because, I don't know, the knight just sits on c5, and where's my breakthrough? Don't know. It's a bit unclear. For white, obviously he can go h4, h5, and try to open up the h-file, which is very viable. Very, very viable idea. But he would have to watch out for bishop h6. Is it that big a deal? I don't know. Maybe it doesn't really matter that much. But we'll of course check with the engine after the game to see what it has to say. It's an interesting position though. Very interesting. The game would be quite different if our knight wasn't back on e8. I think that was the major concession that we've made here, or I've made here. The knight should have been able to go to d5, I think. Okay. King b1 makes sense. Unpinning, well, getting rid of this pin, but the queen is still there. And the queen has to maintain defense of the knight, otherwise I'll take it. If here, that doesn't really do anything. So I'm just going to throw the pawn down the board. a5, bit of a brain-dead move, but, you know, whatever. I'm going to try to open up some lines. If h4, a4, h5, bishop h6, knight e4. It isn't easy. It isn't easy. I don't want to take it without winning material, of course. But it kind of slows the white attack down, I suppose. I mean, yeah. It's interesting. I could also play rook a7 to defend the 7th rank if I need to. So that's another option if I've got to go for it. In theory, I could also lift the rook to d7 to apply pressure and maybe play for c5. Okay, that is a move I didn't even consider. Makes sense, though. It does make sense. Does he want to do this? Well, that just gives up a pawn. Knight d6, he can't do that. Knight c5 might be the idea. If pawn b4, this knight can't go to e4 anymore. Could go to a4 though. So I think I'm going to start with a4. He could try g5 followed by knight f6. That would be quite interesting. That would be quite interesting. Maybe I should have considered pawn h6. And if g5, h5 here, knight takes, pawn takes, bishop h8. My bishop is completely out of the game. That's very sad. That's like the worst bishop ever. So maybe I'd have to take with the bishop, but then g takes. And then queen h6, queen g7 is a problem. And my knight has to sit on e8 to defend. Okay, knight c5. This I wasn't so concerned about. Gotta say. It doesn't really have any infiltrations. It's just annoying. Pawn b4, knight 3 to e4, queen d5. Well, no, then he can go for knight f6. So if here, a3, b3. Not sure we're getting anywhere with that. If knight c7, knight e4, knight 95. Maybe that's better. Maybe that's better. 94, 95, 96. The knights are super annoying. Well, sorry, the queen is under attack, so the queen would have to move first. So let's say, I don't know, queen g3, maybe? See, then I like pawn a3, because if b3, b4, something like that, then I have nice access to c3 with the knight. And that seems more interesting to me. We're also making white tick lower on the clock, which is good. Okay. Really? Really? What are you doing about pawn b4? If take... Well, that's game over, really. So if pawn b4... Oh, that does hang the a-pawn. Pawn a5, queen takes, pawn takes, king takes... Oh, no, he doesn't have to take back, though, does he? So, yeah, we should probably go knight d5. The question is, on knight takes, which is the logical move, because this would be terrible for white, what do we take back with? The c-pawn is the most obvious option. But is it good? I don't know. The e-pawn looks silly, because then pawn e6 is going to be an issue. So we can rule the e-pawn out. If queen takes, do we want a queen trade? Do we want a queen trade? Say rook d3. Rook c8. Rook c3. Rook c6, rook c8, bishop f8. Does look interesting. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. I think the endgame should be favorable. Again, I don't want to take with the e-pawn if my opponent goes for the queen trade, because e6 is going to be an issue, probably. It's interesting. So, obviously, we have a 5 versus 4 over here. But it's difficult to substantiate it, because I can't really go f6 to break the position because of the weakness of the e6 pawn, right? Okay, rook f3. So rook c8 is the move I wanted, threatening take. If here and here and here and here and take, I think the endgame favors us because of our pressure on the c file. I do have to be careful about taking followed by knight d7, though. That's a concern, because that's just a fork. Yeah, okay. So this would be a mistake. So maybe I have to start with rook c7, threatening to double up, and now threatening this. Also defending f7. This can't be a bad move. Can't be a bad move. a3 looks decent, stopping me from going b4, but he can't go rook b3 to attack the b5 pawn. So while b5 is technically a backwards pawn, I think it's fine. And if b4, trying to lock the knight in place, and we take en passant, if he takes with the rook, bishop b5, if he takes, I take the knight while defending b5. If he takes on b5, which looks better, which defends the knight, that's quite interesting. Knight here. Okay, so if here, I assume here. And then if here, probably c3. Which makes a lot of sense. Trying to take away my possibility of going pawn f4, but I think I can go bishop f8 and just take the knight. Okay. If he goes back to c5, then that could have been played. But okay, he's going over there. Here. Okay. If pawn b3, that looks quite risky. I don't even have to take it. I could just retreat and say this trade favors me, which I think it does, because it leaves the c-pawn quite weak. Yeah, so pawn c3. Okay, so I think I want to put the rook on c7 to guard f7. That makes a lot of sense. It's a really interesting position. But I think we're fine. The knight can go to d3 if it wants, and it's interesting, but obviously we'd love to see rook f4, so we could go bishop e5, take and take, but okay, well that looks dangerous, but it's fine. Just. So let's go bishop f8, threatening take, take, and take. Now the knight needs to make a decision. If the knight goes back to d3, then we can take on d4 because of the pin. I don't understand king c2. That's just walking into danger. If king d3, take, and after a takes, we have a very sexy move. Can you find it? After king d3, bishop b4, a b4, what's the sexy move? Pawn a3. And if take, then we take here. And our b-pawn controls both of these two pawns. And I think we're in very good stead. After something like this, take, king take, rook c3, we're winning at least one pawn. We have to be better there. And white is sticking ever lower on the clock. I really hope he doesn't run out of time. But he does. That's actually very annoying. This position, according to the engine, is slightly better for white. Slightly better for white. Proving that looks difficult, to be honest with you. I don't know whether the king has to go to like d2 or something weird. Okay, this is apparently zeros. But, okay. Interesting game. I think we held the cards in that endgame, though. Obviously, the engine thinks white is slightly better here, although it's changing its mind and saying it's dead equal. But there is still play left. There is still play left. And I think we could have grinded that out. I would have loved to actually play that, but whatever. Let's jump into the analysis and see what the engine has to say. Okay, so 79.3% accuracy for white, 79 for us. So not incredible accuracies, and I'm still like trying to learn some of the ideas of the King's Indian because it has, as I said at the start, been quite a while since I've seriously played it. But of course, we start with a Pirt's defense. Knight c3, pawn g6. The engine here likes pawn e5 immediately. After de5, de5, queen d8, king d8, knight f3, bishop d6. Oh, I assume the idea is c6, king c7. Let me see. Is that the idea? No. No, it's king e7. Like bishop c4, king e7, bishop e3, bishop e6. Okay. That's interesting. But pawn g6 is obviously more in a King's Indian style. So pawn f4, bishop g7, knight f3, castles, all very normal moves. Pawn h3 was interesting. Now, I initially considered knight h5, trying to hop in here, but I rejected it on the basis of king f2, which is the best move. And my knight has no place on h5. It's just going to be kicked away with g4. So, The best move is c5. Why did I reject c5? So if take, I assume this must be better. Sorry, not better, but fine for us, right? But the engine actually doesn't want us to take. It wants queen a5, which was an idea I later considered after the bishop came to e3. But the point here is that if takes, I have knight e4, and we have insane pressure on this knight. And after something like bishop to d2 defending, just go knight d6. Material is equal, and the center of the board is wide open. White's pawn pushes no longer make any sense because the central pawns are gone. So c5 was the way to go. And if we'd have gone c5 and seen d5, then after e6, I don't know, d6, bishop e6, bishop e2, pawn d5, and if e5, knight h5, if king f2, f6. Oh, right. I'm definitely learning a lot here. I'm learning a lot. So hopefully the play will improve as the series continues, because I'm learning along with you guys. But here, pawn e5. I also considered the possibility of knight c6, which is the second best move. And here, if e5 and de5, if de5, I can trade the queens, knight d1, and go something like knight d5 or knight e4, and I'm perfectly fine. And if f takes, then I just have knight d5, or knight h5 according to the engine, but I prefer knight d5. And after something like take, c4, queen e4, perfectly fine. But knight bd7, the problem is after e5, taking is terrible. Taking is terrible, because after d takes, the knight goes to e8, and the engine likes h4, it likes bishop e3. I mean, basically everything is a problem. Like, how do I move? I have to go c6, queen c7, I guess. Or knight c7, knight d5, something like that. I always have to be worried about e6 as well. Here, the engine isn't impressed, but you can see this structure could be a problem for us. So knight e8 has to be played. Bishop e3. Pawn c5 was the move. I was correct, but I couldn't bring myself to play it. So if dc5, I correctly calculated that this was terrible. Queen d2 is the best move, but I also thought just bishop c5, and I obviously can't take it back because I lose my queen. So I was considering de5. What I couldn't figure out, though, is what I do after knight e5. This is what I couldn't figure out. Now, the engine finds queen a5, and I didn't see this because I thought it just hangs a piece. Turns out, if this is taken, I just have bishop c3, and if you take back, then that's actually really, really bad. I didn't see that far ahead, because I just win the rook. That I didn't see. So I had just seen this and thought, oh, I'm losing a piece. So I can't play that. And if I don't have queen a5, then I'm just down a clean pawn. I have nothing, basically. The second best idea is queen c7, which just allows knight d5. And then I have to go back to d8 anyway, because of e7 being so weak. So, yeah, I now know that queen a5 is a very powerful idea. Very, very powerful. We've seen it twice in the analysis so far, right? So knight b6. Queen d3 very much confused me. I thought bishop e2 or bishop d3 was more natural. But after queen d3, bishop f5 is inaccurate. c6 is the move. And after castles, knight c7? Let's say g4. Bishop e6. Bishop e2. de5. If de5, we trade queens. But what about if... Sorry, not that. If fe5. Knight b5. Knight b5. Oh, and bishop c4 now. Here and here. That's interesting. Opening up the c file as well. And if something like bishop h6, then the white queen is overloaded. Bishop f5, though. And queen e2 is the best move. I thought queen d2 was going to be played. And I was going to go ahead and take. Because if takes, I trade the queens. And if f takes, c6, and we get a knight to d5. Queen e2, de5, FE5 is inaccurate. DE5 is better, which I thought was the case. But it does stop white from castling queenside, which is why I assume white rejected it. Something like this I was considering. And I thought we were okay here. But FE5, pawn C6, pawn G4, bishop E6, knight G5 is inaccurate. And it kind of gives the game away. Castling queenside is better, but, you know, I'm very happy to have this pressure. Engine likes pawn F6. I think I would have gone knight C7, really. King B1, knight D5, and I think this is quite comfortable, to be honest. But knight G5, bishop C4, queen D2, and here I was over the moon with this knight C4, and here we are better, but taking is wrong. Pawn C5 is the move. And if here, I suppose white can't castle queenside, can he? See, I was thinking that if I don't take the bishop just goes to f4. So let's say I play something like knight c7. I thought, okay, bishop f4. No, sorry, no. Bishop f2, guarding d4. And I was like, I don't really know what I do here. I mean, white can't castle, sure. I suppose if b3, that massively weakens the white position. Kicking the knight away. Because the knight has to be kicked away because b2's under attack. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I'm learning as well. But I play take-take, and we're still better. But here I have to go bishop h6. Really? And after knight e4? Knight c7? I thought pawn h4 solved all the problems. But there is pawn f6. And if take, the knight is lost. Although there is queen b3 check. And after knight d5, if the knight retreats, queen e7. Oh, right, okay. I had to act quicker. I didn't, and allowed the castle. And now if bishop h6, h4. Well, now I don't have f6. Right, that's the point. e6 was hasty. So I'm just worse. b5, king b1, a5, knight ge4. I'm playing the right ideas. a4, knight c5, knight c7. Queen e4 is a mistake. g5 is better. I thought h4 was surely on the way. Engine does like a3 here. And if b3, f6, okay. And if take, rook takes, e6 is defended. Oh, and this diagonal's very strong. Right, okay. That makes sense. Queen e4. Knight d5. Engine prefers pawn a3. I was calculating this position. I saw a takes b2, and I didn't like it. b4 is stronger. And if knight a4, knight d5, if pawn b3... I mean, we're down a pawn, but there's going to be issues with... Oh, well, knight e3, actually, just winning the exchange. Knight d5, queen d5, cd5. We trade everything. And after rook f3, we're fine here, except rook ac8 is wrong? Rook fc8 is right. Oh, right, okay. I think I understand why. Because after rook f1, this rook can come to a7. Oh, and yeah, and then if we take here, there's no knight d7. Of course, because the problem we faced is that this didn't work. Now, if takes, we take, and that's brilliant. But the problem was knight d7. And here I would have to give up the exchange, which obviously I didn't want to do. But yeah, if we'd have done it with this rook and pawn a3 was played, then bishop e5 would work. There is knight e6 desperado, but after the knight take, engine likes rook c4, I think we're fine here. Like, I don't know, double up, rook e4. This is better for us. So rook ac8 is incorrect. Noted. Pawn a3, rook c7 is okay. Knight a6, rook c6, knight b4, rook c4. Here, white has one move to push for an advantage. There's only one move. White didn't find it, and it's g5. And if I try to double up, c3, bishop f8, the knight goes to d3, I still think we're okay here. Like, I don't know, h4, king g7, rook g1. Probably just a draw, in reality. Maybe white is the only one with chances, but we have a very nice blockade. The pawn c3. Rook fc8 is wrong because of g5 again. The engine wants h6, stopping g5. Rook fc8, king c2, bishop f8, and white runs out of time. But we had a lot of traps in this position. A lot of traps set up. I couldn't understand king c2 because it seemed to just create problems. The problem with a move like knight d3 is, of course, we win d4, and the pin is an issue. There's so many ways for white to go wrong here. If white retreats the king, I was going to take. And after a takes, play a3. And if takes and takes, the engine thinks it's equal after rook d to f1. But in reality, only black can win this. Only black can really win this because of the weaknesses of the white pawns, right? They're all pretty weak. So this is what I would have gone for. So knight rook takes, rook c4. I mean, rook d3 looks like the most natural move. f6, take, g5. Don't know if I'd have played that, but it's interesting. There was also another line I was looking at with king d3, bishop b4, a b4, and a3. Now, the engine thinks that white is okay if he finds king back to c2, going for this. But of course, only black is better. Again, like c3 is very weak, h3 could be weak. Only black can win this. And this is what I was going for, but unfortunately, my opponent ran out of time. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you liked this format, then please let me know down in the comments. And I will be learning more about the King's Indian in my own time and as I play these games and analyze them and as we climb through the rating ladder. If you want to see one of my older videos in the King's Indian defense, check out the video up here. And I'll probably leave some other video down there if that is more appealing as well. I'll figure it out when I do the editing. But thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.